Hey listeners, it's one of your co-hosts, Mike Morford, letting you know that this week's episode is a re-release of one of our past episodes, something we like to call a still missing episode. In this episode, you'll hear a replay of episode 50, our most mysterious cases so far, in which Jess and I recap some of the most mysterious cases we covered over our first 50 episodes. For long-time listeners, some of these cases may sound familiar, or maybe there are a few you missed. And for newer listeners, maybe you'll hear a case that really intrigues you, and you'll want to go back and check out those episodes. So enjoy this still missing episode, and we'll see you back here soon with an all-new episode of Missing Persons.
You're listening to Missing Persons, brought to you by AbJack Entertainment. Be sure to check out some of the other great true crime podcasts from this network, including The Murder in My Family, DNA ID, Beyond Bizarre True Crime, Zodiac Speaking, Scene of the Crime, and 3 Men and a Mystery. All of these podcasts are available for you to binge on right now, wherever you listen to podcasts. Subscribe where you're listening to this podcast so you don't miss an episode.
The views and opinions expressed by guests on this podcast do not necessarily represent those of the podcast, its creators, or sponsors. If you would like to discuss a missing persons case on this podcast, please be sure to visit missingpersonspodcast.net. This episode may contain unsettling or disturbing subject matter. Listener discretion is advised.
Welcome to Missing Persons, a podcast dedicated to spreading the word about people who have vanished under mysterious or unexplained circumstances, and the family members who are looking for answers. I'm Jess Betancourt.
And I'm Mike Morford. Together we created this podcast to help give a voice to people who continue to search for their missing loved ones, in some cases even after decades have gone by. In each episode, you'll hear from Jess giving listeners the backstory and the basic facts of the disappearance.
Then Mike will speak with someone who's intimately connected to the missing person, and his guest will share their story with us. So sit back and enjoy this episode, and who knows, maybe you can help us find someone who's missing. Hi, everybody. Welcome to this special episode of Missing Persons. In observance of a significant milestone for this podcast, the 50th episode, Mike and I want to do something different. And here today, you have both of us hosting this episode. Say hi, Mike.
Hey everyone, thanks for joining us for the first 50 episodes, and we can't wait for the next 50.
We decided it would be fun if we each selected our 5 cases that, of all the 50 that we've covered, we thought we found particularly interesting or intriguing, thought-provoking, etc. Obviously, all the cases are tragic, and the families in every case continue to be anguished with their ambiguous loss. And we recognize that, but there are some cases that have stuck out to each of us over the course of doing this podcast for the past couple years. So we each came up with a list of 5 and we compared notes, and we did not have any overlap.
Yeah, which is interesting. I think we sort of maybe all both sort of gravitate towards certain situations or certain mysterious parts, different clues in some of the cases that we chose. So it'll be interesting to see your list versus my list.
Right. Yeah. I mean, we did share our lists, obviously, but with each of us is going to recap one of our top 5 cases for the other, and we'll sort of discuss what we remember about it and what stuck out to us, and possibly just shoot around a couple theories or, why the case resonated with us. And my first case, which many of you have heard about, is the case of Sandra Crispo. I covered this in the very first episode of Missing Persons, and in an episode I did for Beyond Bizarre True Crime, which is another one of our podcasts, which features guest hosts. So anybody who knows me knows that I consider this case one of my top priorities because I live right next to the town where Sandra went missing from, which was Hanson, Massachusetts. And many of you might know that town because Maura Murray she was from Hanson. She didn't disappear from Hanson, but it's a really small town. It's really quiet. There is not much crime. It's just a residential area with, good schools and it's just shocking that Sandra went missing. So a real quick recap of the case. Sandra was a grandmother. She was in her 50s. She lived alone with her dog Clarence in a small house in Hanson. As of around April 2019, it's when she moved into that house. She moved away from Quincy, Massachusetts, where she had always lived. She was supposed to babysit her grandchildren that day. This is a day in August. And she stopped answering her home phone after dropping her car off at a mechanic. It needed repairs. And her daughter showed up a day and a half later to drop off the grandkids, and Sandra was not there. The sliding door in the back was unlocked. The dog was there, hungry and scared, but there was no sign of Sandra, who, mind you, had no car. She had no cell phone and she had no computer, yet she was gone. Her daughter, Lena, has worked with us a couple times on these episodes and said that her mom was a real homebody. She wouldn't just walk somewhere. But her purse and her shoes were missing. So, and a couple more interesting items. Lena looked around her bedroom and found that the bed looked like it had been disrupted, like the bed slats were in disarray, almost as though somebody had looked under it or been forcibly jerking around the mattress. And the bottom sheet was also missing on the brand new sheets that she had helped her mom buy. So, one more development, the state police aren't really talking about this, but they have found a biological substance, in quotes, on the bedroom floor, a sort of, it looks like blood spray, and some of the blood was confirmed to be Sandra's. So that's basically the case in a nutshell. It's very, very perplexing.
Well, the first thing that jumps out at me is it's like a case local to you. So I think that I have one on my list that was local to me when I lived in New Jersey. So I think there's a certain aspect of having a local case to you that sort of grabs you. But yeah, anytime someone disappears from inside their home when they're last known to be there and they disappear, that's a little, to me, that's harder to explain than someone that's out running errands or out shopping or out traveling on a highway someplace. Any number of things could happen, but to have this happen right in her home was kind of weird. And those clues that you just recapped, the bed, that kind of stuff, little things. There wasn't overly a big sign of a struggle, but that latest development you mentioned, the blood, that's definitely troubling. That could indicate something did happen to Sandra in her home.
Yeah, and it's strange. The family hired a private detective, and he talked to the neighbors. They did not see or hear anything. They believe that she disappeared at night because the lights were on in the house, and she wouldn't have had the lights on in the daytime. It was August, so it was lots of daylight. The thing with Sandra is she was very disconnected. She didn't have a computer or cell phone, so it's hard to understand how she could have had any sort of dark secrets because, she, as her daughter said, she lived a pretty simple life. There is only one thing that her daughter and son-in-law think that might have been a factor, which is that she had possibly inherited quite a bit of money from her father who had died. And the money was a bone of contention among her siblings, who, according to Lena, her daughter, have not been cooperative in the investigation, which is a bad sign. So, again, this kind of case, absent of very, very random serial killer who happened to be watching her, there's usually some kind of personal connection in these cases where, as you said, somebody disappears from their home. She wasn't just grabbed off the street,
Yeah, and one interesting thing that jumped out to me was the fact that she had had her vehicle in the shop that day, and correct me if I'm wrong, but didn't she leave her keys, the house keys to that car were on the ring? So I was wondering if somehow somebody at the shop, a customer, an employee, someone there could have saw an opportunity and we start looking close to home most of these cases, but I wonder if in this case it could be an outsider that saw an opportunity and jumped on it, or is that just a red herring that she just happened to have her vehicle in the shop that day with a house key on the ring?
Right. Yeah, that's a very good question. The front door was locked when her daughter got there. The back slider was open. I mean, unlocked, not open. The police have not really talked about the mechanic and the body shop. I don't know if they've explored the employees. I know they talked to the mechanic, but that is a good question. I mean, it does seem sort of strange that she left her keys and that night she vanished from her home. But again, we just don't know. It could be a red herring. The fact that her purse is missing, I do find a little strange. It looks like maybe a robbery, but again, she didn't have a lot of stuff. She didn't have valuables in the house. So it's really perplexing. And it's going on 3 years now, and her family's desperate for answers. There was just a search this past weekend, again, in a park in Weymouth, Massachusetts. I don't know how they're pinpointing these search locations. I don't know if there's any kind of info that is behind the scenes about where they should be looking, or if it's just people picking places that are, have wide open spaces and going with that. I just don't know.
It'll be interesting to see what kind of developments there are and see if there's any more news that comes out in her case.
Yeah.
Now, my first case, and I did mine in no particular order. So the first case I picked was Rebecca Barsotti, who was a 33-year-old Virginia transplant. She disappeared in July 2021, so this is a fairly recent case. The area she disappeared in was the Clark Fork River near Alberton, Montana. Rebecca was in the process of going through a divorce, and she had separated from her husband. They had, had a stormy relationship, and there were some indications or allegations of domestic violence, which included a no contact order. So when you see that kind of stuff, I think you're already starting to get a picture of something bad happening. But the last, sighting of Rebecca was sort of her on her own in an area along a river. And this is near Superior, Montana. She met with her estranged husband's caretaker to get some stuff of hers, and went on about her way. She traveled to the Clark Fork River and apparently was with her dog, Cerberus. And she just wanted to walk near the water and walk with Cerberus, and disappeared and was never seen again. And it wasn't until a family hiking along the river that day found a lot of her items stacked neatly along the riverbank, as if she had just set them down nicely and walked away for a minute and planned on coming back, and she never did. And it wasn't until several days later that Cerberus was found 10 miles downstream. He was found dead, but Rebecca was never seen again. So the police, seem to tell her parents that they think that she fell into the water and drowned, which seems like it could be a very possible scenario here. But despite searches, despite people looking for her along there in that water, there's never been any recovery of her body. And her parents' simple question is, and I think it's a very, one that I'd ask is, okay, if she drowned, where's her body? I mean, we don't have the stats on how long someone that drowns their body is not found. We don't know how many people have never been found in that stretch of water, but it just seems weird that her body was never found surfacing later on or downstream or what have you. So I know this was a fairly recent case that we covered. What were your thoughts on it, Jess?
Well, I remember seeing photos of the place where she supposedly, according to the police, they do think, I believe the theory is that they think the dog got into some kind of trouble in the water and she went in after it to try to help the dog, or vice versa. But I didn't get the feeling that she was there to swim. I kind of got the feeling remember there was a video of her on her phone training her dog by the riverside. So the phone was found laying there with her hat, I believe, and her sunglasses. She was training the dog with hand commands or hand signals. And somehow the theory goes the dog got into the river, she went in after it, and they both drowned, and she hasn't turned up. But the photos I've seen of that place, the river doesn't look very deep. And I couldn't really get a sense of how, I don't know that area at all. So of how, is the water rushing? Are there rapids? Could she have gotten drowned and hung up down under some rocks or in some, sticks or whatever and just not surfaced? It's really hard to know. It seems somewhat unlikely.
Yeah.
Again, though, we've heard lots of stories about bodies that surfaced 3 years later and, have been there the whole time. So it's really tough to know.
Yeah. And it's a secluded area. So if she did somehow run into someone out there that had bad intentions, it's an area where something could have happened to her and there'd be no witnesses. But what the one thing that jumps out to me is how neatly everything of hers was sort of stacked, as if she just sat it down. And, I think in the police scenario where she goes in scrambling after her dog, I could see her throwing stuff down all haphazardly and it being a mess. Instead, this stuff was stacked up neatly. So to me, that just sort of clashes a little bit with the police theory.
Yeah, although it doesn't really go with the abduction theory either,
That's true.
So I don't know. I kind of envisioned the dog going in the water and her being like, "Oh, come on, dog," and not really realizing the danger of the situation, putting her stuff down and going in. I can't really get past her not being found. I think it's very strange. But the abduction angle, it to me seems unlikely. I mean, there were hikers in the area. It was broad daylight. It just seems totally bizarre that she would have. I mean, it happens. Obviously, we know it happens, but again, there's no really good answers in this case. It's a real head scratcher. Her parents have moved to the state to try to look for her, and there's been scores of searches by boat and along the riverbanks, and just nothing. You said the dog turned up 10 miles away. Was it that far?
Yeah, it was 10 miles.
That's a long way.
Yeah. So, and there weren't any details. We don't know if it was he walked that far. They weren't clear. They didn't clearly state if it was in the water, if he was along the shore. They were, one thing we mentioned in the episode was that an autopsy wasn't done to determine cause of death.
On the dog, yeah.
Yeah, on the dog. So we don't know even how he died. Did he drown? Was it malnutrition? Was it dehydration?
And that seems ridiculous. I mean, they should have absolutely done that.
Yeah, and unfortunately that wasn't done. So that's just a little piece of the mystery of how he died. But I think it's just one of those cases we'll just have to keep our eye on and see if there are any developments.
Yeah. Yeah. That is again a real puzzler. I'd be very curious to see what happens there. Okay, so my next case is Dulce Maria Alvarez, a case we covered in episode 14. Dulce was 5 years old, one of our few children cases, and she was playing at a Bridgeton, New Jersey playground in September of 2019. Her mom was sitting in the car nearby watching Dulce and her little brother as they played on the playground, but Dulce and her little brother, who has not been named, by the way, ran off to go to the swings. And the swings were sort of out of view of where her mom was sitting in the car. And I think they said it was about 10 minutes later, the mom realized she couldn't see the kids, and she decided to go and check. And she found her little boy standing there crying, and they had gotten popsicles, and he dropped his popsicle on the ground and was crying. And she asked him, "Where's your sister? Where's your sister?" And he pointed to behind some maintenance sheds that were there at the park. And, that Dulce was not there. And Dulce has never been seen again. The little boy, unfortunately, the mom described him to us as nonverbal. I mean, and I think he was also very, quite young. So he wasn't able to share anything about what happened to his sister. But some kids who were playing basketball on the adjacent court did apparently tell police that at least one of them believes they saw Dulce being led into a van by a man. And this was a Hispanic man with acne is what one of the kids said. And it was a red van with sliding doors. So if that's correct, that is obviously, very, very concerning. The New Jersey police have searched everywhere, years later, here we are, and they have found nothing, no van, no man, and no Dolce.
Yeah, it seems like it could easily be a case of stranger abduction. There's been a lot of rumors and speculation that perhaps this was someone connected to the family. I think I've heard some reports that the family has ties to Mexico and that she may have been sent to Mexico. Again, this is all rumor mill, hearsay stuff. I don't think there's any proof of any of it. But the one thing that jumped out to me in this case was Dulce's mom. She did these interviews that were publicized nationally, locally, and then nationally. And a lot of people were sort of suspicious of her because of her presentation, her what they called emotionless descriptions. And it seemed like she was really unaffected, like she could have been talking about what she had for breakfast or something.
She had a very flat affect in her interviews. Yes.
Yeah. And that was one thing that, and I know that people say don't focus on how someone reacts and how they present themselves, because people deal with grief in different ways. They deal with, nervousness in different ways. So you try not to read into that, but a lot of people did sort of get rubbed the wrong way by her presentation after the fact.
Yeah. I mean, look, we all know in missing children's cases, often the police start looking very close to home, right, for the perpetrator. I will say straight out, I'll be very surprised in this case if it turns out that Dolce's mom had anything to do with it. I think that her somewhat emotionless relation of the story is just the way she's handling her grief and stress. Her Dolce's father, who was confirmed to be in Mexico, has been ruled out by police as having anything to do with it, as has the mom's boyfriend, who was apparently at work that day, has an alibi. I do believe that this was a stranger abduction. And unfortunately, I think that somebody was probably and really creepily watching the playground for an opportunity. Playgrounds, if you're looking for a kid to take, the playground is where you loiter, right? And you see a 5-year-old. She was a really little girl. No parents in sight. You run out and grab her and throw her in the van and off you go.
Yeah. That's, I think in stat wise, stranger abductions are pretty rare, but it does happen. And if, things went according to the way they seem to from the descriptions, then it likely was a stranger abduction.
Yeah. I mean, and I think the best we can hope for in this case is that it's somebody who wanted to raise a child, and perhaps even told themselves, oh, this little girl's being neglected, no one's around, and just, let's hope that's the case. I know the investigation was bogged down with some really weird hoax letters and maps that were sent anonymously to random parts of the country. I think almost like 100 of them or something. Police have said that those are not related. They're hoaxes, and they're just basically noise that they're trying to ignore because they don't seem to be related at all to the investigation.
Yeah. It's a sad case. At the end of the day, it's a little girl who's, her family's missing her, and hopefully there's some kind of news on it. Well, the next case I have is from April of 1988, and that's the case of Randy Leach, a 17-year-old boy that disappeared in Linwood, Kansas. Now, he went missing after attending a party, and not just him that's missing, it's his car that he was driving. It was his mom's car. Neither Randy nor the car has ever been found. And what was interesting is immediately after he went missing, there was a lot of confusion. There were rumors. There were shortcomings in the investigation, according to Randy's family over the years. There was, all kinds of red herrings possibly in this was satanic panic time when there were reported satanic parties and stuff that he may have been a victim at. But Randy's parents, Alberta and Harold, have been championing, that case for over 3 decades now. So it was great to have them on and discuss their efforts and what happened over the years and how they've clashed with the investigators. And sadly, Harold recently passed away after he was on with us.
I saw that.
Yeah, my heart goes out to his mom because she's now all alone to sort of carry this on.
And Randy was an only child.
He was an only child, and you could tell by the discussion with him, they really, really loved him, and they were devastated when he went missing, and to not have answers all those years, it really affected them and changed the outcome of their lives.
I can't imagine.
Yeah. So I think the difficult thing for me in discussing that case and researching it was sort of wading through all the rumors and the innuendos and the gossip and what's real and what's not, and sort of getting through that and getting to the what's important in the case.
Yeah. I remember researching that one and sort of dismissing the satanic panic stuff because it just seems it's always so overhyped, and it was sort of the era, right? That was a big thing then. But did any cases actually ever end up being a satanic ritual that we know? I mean,
it doesn't seem like it now. It's usually not related to satanic panic, but anything from the 80s is definitely prone to that kind of discussion.
Right. But, yeah, sure.
Yeah. And what's interesting is, again, his car is missing too. So if a car it's one thing if a person goes missing, but to make a car disappear, you've only got a couple possibilities. It's either at the bottom of a lake someplace or a river, or it's been sent to a scrapyard or chop shop. There's only 2 ways you make a vehicle totally disappear and never show up again. So I think it limits the possibilities here. There's either foul play and somebody went through a lot of effort to hide the car, or he went into the water someplace, which we discussed a little bit in that episode. There were some searches and there were some theories about how far the car could or couldn't have gone.
Yes.
And I'm one of those people that when a car goes missing and is never found, I always lean towards it being in more someplace, because I think that's usually the more likely outcome. Because we see, I don't know how many times this year I've seen different cases being solved where the car is found with the missing person inside of it.
And we'll get into one of those shortly. I know one of your cases involves a submerged vehicle. I remember when I was looking at this, I thought, we know that Randy, unfortunately, one of his very good friends said that he was quite impaired that night. But I don't think that anyone ever actually saw him driving away in his car. If I recall, when the friend got back and he and his car were both gone, but that doesn't mean that he drove it, right? And I do remember there was a lot of talk about the river near where the party was, and there were some cars that had been recovered from that same river, but Randy's wasn't one of them. So, is it down there somewhere in the silt? I remember there was a railroad bridge, and they talked about whether the car could have gotten maybe, caught up between the I'm not an engineer, so I don't know the name of the structure of the railroad bridge somehow and not passed through and gotten washed downstream. And who knows? It's really, really sad. I do agree with you. I tend to think that he is probably somewhere submerged in the water.
And I always keep an eye open, and hopefully that's a case that if he is down there, he's found at some point. And I'd love for it to be while Alberta is still alive, to get that news and find out what happened to him, because I know her and Harold searched for so long trying to find out the truth.
Right. Okay. So my next case is Betty Alexander. This is probably the most complicated case that I'm going to talk about, and trying to recap it is just, it's really, I can't get into all the details. There's a lot here, but in essence, Betty was an older woman. I think she was like at least 68 or so, possibly young, low 70s. I don't remember, but she was a widow living alone at the Center Street Apartments in Sullivan, Missouri. Again, similar to Sandra, she had no car and no cell phone. She socialized with a small circle of neighbors and her own grown children. And Betty was a little bit, she had some health struggles. She had severe back pain from a fall when she was younger, and she actually had pins and rods inserted in her back. So she had a home physical therapist that visited regularly. She had Meals on Wheels come regularly, and she relied on fentanyl patches for pain relief. So, there's quite a bit there. And then she literally vanished into thin air in April 2019 with some really strange clues. So Betty was last seen around 3 p.m. This is on Wednesday, April 10th. And she was outside doing some gardening. A neighbor that she was friendly with saw her. After that, no one saw her again. Her daughter showed up to check on her a couple of days later, and she used her own key to get in because the apartment was locked. And there was no sign of Betty, but her glasses were there, which she wore them all the time. She needed them to see pretty much everything. Her purse was there. And inside the purse were 2 envelopes with $100 cash each. And this was really bizarre to Tanya, her daughter, who was our guest when we interviewed her, because her mom didn't do her own banking. She didn't go to the bank. She didn't take money out in cash in hundreds. It's completely unexplained. So, and her keys were also in her purse. So when they spoke to the Meals on Wheels people, they learned that they had been to the apartment the day before and the door was open. So somebody locked it in the interim, and that's just completely strange. And then the last thing was that they noticed that she had 2 boxes of her fentanyl patches delivered by Sink's Pharmacy that week, and one of them was gone. So yeah. That was a big, what her daughters thought was a pretty bad sign.
Yeah, anytime I hear fentanyl, it just seems like such a problem in the country right now that, there's a big addiction and people seeking that. It's very dangerous. And, I hear that. I wonder if there's someone that knew she was getting these deliveries and, was desperate to get one of those patches. And, is it something along those lines? Or is that just a red herring? Is that another thing where we start looking at their direction and her disappearance has nothing to do with that? And I want to say there was a possible sighting of her.
What's really strange is that, and, in a lot of these cases, I feel like sometimes these missing persons cases have secrets, right? Like there's something that the family doesn't know that ends up must have had to do with what happened to them, right? And one of the cases you're going to talk about, I think that really must be the case. Her daughter, Tanya, says that Betty did not walk places. And again, she didn't have a car. She did not walk places. Her back pain was bad. She did not go out and about. Yet that Wednesday, she had been at City Hall in the town she lived in, and she had been changing the name on a utility bill that needed to go into her name. I guess it was in her husband's name prior to that. So she was seen at City Hall, and they know for a fact she was there because the name change was actually affected on the account. So this was not discovered till after she went missing, but, her daughter said, I have no idea how she got there. Did she get a ride? Did a neighbor? But if a neighbor helped her out, why wouldn't they have come forward and said so by now, right? It's just very strange. And now there was one more possible sighting. Somebody was driving down the street on Thursday, the 11th. This is the day after she was last seen gardening, and saw a woman in a tan outfit standing in the middle of the street across from the fire station, looking completely discombobulated, out of it, just like staring into space. They had to drive around her. She was literally in the middle of the street. And whoever reported this believes that it was Betty that they saw. And she's never been seen since then.
To me, I I wonder if that means could she have had a stroke or something that affected her mind, her memory? She doesn't know who she is, that kind of thing. She wandered, and just wandered off, and something happened to her. But again, even if that's the case, where would her
Where is
remains
she?
be? Why haven't they been found? So that almost seems like it's not possible, because who disappears that way and just isn't eventually found? How far could she have gone wandering like that? So to me, it makes it seem like there's something more going on that we just can't put our finger on. There's a missing clue, and maybe it's that person that brought her to change her stuff at the with the county or whatever. Maybe that
Yeah.
person holds a key, but they're not coming forward. So that's a
Yeah,
shame.
it's really strange because, usually you hear about, so Betty did have a very, very, very early diagnosis of onset of dementia, but it was low grade. She was taking medication for it. The doctor said there's this episode, if this is what it was, would not have fit in with her diagnosis. Okay. Normally with these elder cases, you would think that somebody might have victimized her and been stealing from her, right? But in this case, they found extra money in her purse. Like, where did that money come from? That is a very, very strange factor.
Yeah, and if there's a criminal involved that's stealing her patches, for example, you'd think they also would be taking whatever money and valuables she has, whatever they can score, basically. So
Exactly.
it's a real head scratcher. It's one of those cases that you just can't, you don't know where the truth lies.
Yeah, and I feel terrible for her daughter Tanya, who is anguished over her mother because there has been no movement in this case whatsoever. At least with the Sandra Crispo case, for Lena, the state police are working on it and they have some leads. But in this case, I know Tanya posted recently there just doesn't seem to be, this investigation is going nowhere.
Hmm.
So it's really sad. I find it hard to believe that an elderly woman with rods in her back who required fentanyl patches was able to wander so far that she has never been found and succumbed in the wilderness somewhere. I mean, she lived in a city. It's just really unlikely to me. Unfortunately, I'm worried that there's a different outcome.
Yeah, and that's what makes some of these cases that we've got on our list, so troubling, is because they just don't really add up. They don't make sense, what we know of them. My next case is Dave Cohen, and that's a case we just covered recently on Missing Persons. And sort of like one case is to you, it's close to home. This case was close to me in South Jersey when I lived there.
Yeah.
Dave Cohen's case we covered in episode 49. He was 43 years old. He was from West Virginia, but he drove from West Virginia to South Jersey frequently because he was originally from there. In April 2015, he went to visit his friend in Lacey Township, New Jersey. He knew that area well. It's a trip he had taken many times. But with 30 minutes left in his drive, he decided he was going to pull over and check into the Red Line Motel on the Route 206 circle in Southampton. This is in the middle of the Pine Barrens. It's pretty barren out there. This little area where the hotel was there's a few businesses there, and it's actually across the way from a state police barracks. But besides that, there's not a lot out there. He told his friend that he was tired and he rest and he'd see him the next day, and he never showed. And his friend called the motel and was told by the staff that his truck was there, but he wasn't. And to recap, the friend alerted Dave's family, who in turn contacted the state police, and they investigated. And luckily, again, they were right across the street, so they didn't have to go far. They found a local pizza shop right there around the circle where Dave had gone into, ordered a sandwich. Everything was normal. He was by himself, nothing out of the ordinary. He got into his truck and pulled out of the lot and was never seen again. And his truck was found at the motel. He wasn't, and he's never been seen again. And it's an area where there's not many places you can go if you walk off besides walking into a field or something like that, because there's just nothing out there, which is one of the strange things in this case.
Yeah, that one's pretty fresh in my mind because, again, we did just cover it. I have to tell you, I cannot wrap my head around what could have happened to him. First of all, the stopping at the hotel when you have less than 30 minutes left to drive. I mean, I will drive if I'm like, oh, I still have another 2 hours, I'm tired, I'll just go. You just get some coffee and you just keep going. That's just strange. He had a comfortable room waiting for him at his friend's house that he was used to staying at, and he chose to stop. And we know that, well, according to the hotel, the motel, he extended checkout the next day until 3 p.m., which doesn't make any sense to me at all.
Yeah, that clashes with telling your friend, hey, I'm just tired. I can't drive any further. I'm just going to pull off, and I'll, you would think in that situation, he'll get up first thing in the morning and make the rest of the trip. But that never happened. And his belongings were found there. He had an unopened cell phone still in the packaging because he had lost his other cell phone, and he had this temporary replacement that was still packaged up, never used. His laptop was found in his truck. And interestingly, the key to his motel room was found inside his suitcase, inside his locked truck. So truck's locked up, all his stuff's there. Key to the truck is missing, and Dave himself is missing. Just a very, no one at the motel saw or heard anything unusual. Although there was a little bit of speculation that an ambulance was called at some point during the night. And that story sort of flip-flopped from the motel owner, apparently. But police checked it out and determined there was no ambulance ever called and dispatched to that location. So sort of don't know what happened in regards to that, but it was something interesting that his sister Jen was able to find out with help from a private investigator.
Right. Yeah. I mean, and, when I think about that case, I think, okay, well, he must have been meeting somebody, right? He must have had some arrangement to meet someone at that motel, but he never used his cell phone. It was still literally in the shrink wrap package. So I do wonder if they ever checked the motel phone records to see if he called somebody from the room. Again, very frustratingly, the room was cleaned out before the police searched it. So we don't know if he ate that sandwich in the room. They did find his jeans neatly folded on the made bed in the room, according to the motel owner, but we don't know of anything else that was in the room. His stuff was in his truck. It really doesn't make any sense at all to me. Unfortunately, there doesn't seem like there's really any clues at all. I mean, he literally vanished, and there's no indication that he was meeting anybody or had secrets or anything. It's a real puzzler.
Yeah, and the only CCTV footage is from the pizza shop, and there's no other footage from that area, so there's no real hope of finding something that's on a camera someplace because it's just not available there. So again, endless possibilities, but no clear path to go down. And again, it's an area that you just don't walk off to unless you're planning on walking out into the woods or out into a field for some reason.
Right. And I know when they searched for him, they did find another body.
Exactly. So that shows that they did search the area thoroughly, because they actually found another person that was dead that had nothing to do with his case. But
right.
Just where is he? If something happened to him and he was injured or he harmed himself or whatever, where is his body? From another standpoint, it's hard to abduct an adult male. You just don't see it very frequently.
Right. And so he was a big, strong guy. He looked like a big,
pretty burly guy. Yeah. So he doesn't look like someone you'd easily force to go any place with you. So
did they use dogs? I forget if they used search dogs from the motel.
I don't remember if they did. I know they did searches, but I don't remember if they were with dogs or not. But whatever searches they did do, just no sign of him anyplace. Yeah. So just one of those cases with, I just wish there was some other clue to work with, but there isn't, unfortunately.
Yeah. Yeah. So along those lines, another head scratcher of a case is Allie Lowitzer. We covered in episode 22. Allie was a 16-year-old girl who lived in Spring, Texas. This is in 2010. And on Monday, April 26th, she went to school. She's seen on all day at school. She attended all her classes as usual. She is seen on the school bus surveillance video riding the bus home, which is eerie because it is literally the last time she is ever seen. She got off the bus, and some boys who got off at the same stop saw her walking away from her home and toward the little sort of downtown area. Now, she had asked her mom for permission to walk to a restaurant she worked at called Burger Barn to pick up her paycheck. It was her first paycheck. She had just started working there a couple weeks earlier. And she was seen walking in the direction of the Burger Barn. She texted a friend at 2:57. This is a guy named Jay, and made a plan for later that evening, to get together. And then she literally fell off the face of the earth and her phone was shut off. And she was somebody, I remember this, her mom said she sent something like 4,000 texts that year. Like she was one of those girls who's constantly on her phone. So the fact that her phone was off was a terrible sign. So anyway, she disappeared. Her dad managed to get the surveillance footage from the gas station that was at the intersection that she would have had to go through, a major intersection, to get to the Burger Barn. She never was seen on that surveillance footage, and she did not pick up her check at Burger Barn. So, and it's a distance of a few blocks. So in somewhere between her bus stop and the Burger Barn, something happened to her, and we have no idea what it is.
Yeah, it's one of those cases where you can almost narrow down the very specific section based on the footage of the route she would have taken and to where she would have been seen on this footage. And you can really narrow it down to an area. But the question is, what happened there? That's the $1 million question. Did someone that she knew pick her up? Did someone she didn't know pick her up? Would she have been conned into maybe taking a ride with someone, or maybe someone she knew a little bit? Or could she have just been flat out abducted? Someone by force just dragged her into a vehicle. Unfortunately, there was no evidence found, I think, pointing in any direction. No, belongings of hers scattered on the side of the road, as I recall. So nothing to really go on as to what happened to her.
Yeah. And it wasn't super isolated, by the way. It was a residential neighborhood, and it led to this downtown area. I mean, and the other thing to remember with Allie is she wasn't a tiny girl. I mean, she wasn't 6 feet tall, but she was a larger girl. So I can't imagine her, just being easily pulled into a car with no witnesses and no sound and no dropping her backpack and somebody speeding away. It seems so unlikely. I do know that there were some witnesses who saw a white truck pulled over along the route that she was walking, but that's not a very big lead, a white truck in Texas.
Yeah, I don't know how many cases I've covered, on various podcasts of a white van or a white truck. It's just the most generic type thing you can ever have in one of these cases.
Yeah, I know there was a PI working with the family who was convinced that a serial killer named Brandon Scott Laverne, I think is how you say it, was responsible because he had relatives in Spring, Texas. But according to everybody, he was cleared because he had an alibi. I don't know if he was even in town or would have spent any time in Spring, Texas. So that lead seems to have gone nowhere. This is, again, a case in which it doesn't really seem like the police have anything to go on. It's been 12 years. And, her mom says it's absolutely out of the question that Allie would have left. That was the first thing that the police suggested, that, a 16-year-old girl who, she probably ran away. But no, this girl did not run away. She had left her cell phone charger, first of all. She didn't take any of her things, makeup, clothes, money she had sitting there. She would have gone to pick up her check. This is one where that is just not an option, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think if someone's going to run away, a teenager, that they're going to take every bit of money they can with them. So to leave a check there, it just doesn't add up.
Right. So again, it's really a puzzling case. I feel terribly for her mother, who has still, at last I saw, she still had Allie's room intact with her things, hoping that there is some sign of her daughter. But after 12 years, obviously it doesn't look very good.
Yeah. It's one of those cases that I just wish there was more to go on, and that might help get answers. But the next case I have is Dale Williams. And this is one of the most bizarre cases I think I've ever covered on this podcast or any other one. There's a lot of weird clues and rabbit holes. Now, Dale Williams was a well-known and 42-year-old family man who lived in Nucla, Colorado, and he went missing in May 1999. Dale owned a body shop, and on the day he went missing, he received a call from a motorist who was asking for help with car trouble they were experiencing. And the reason we know this is because Dale had a friend and his son over in the shop talking to them when the call came in. And Dale wasn't a mechanic. He was a body repairman, but he agreed to help, and he set out his pickup truck.
Yeah.
He took some tools with him, and he, despite not being a mechanic, he went out to try and help them, and he was never seen again. It wasn't until several weeks later that his truck was discovered submerged in a nearby river. And so when they started looking into Dale's background and what was going on in his life, an interesting thing was developed that Dale had a friend of his, and they had become distanced because the friend's wife wanted to leave him, and Dale and his wife helped facilitate her getting out of that relationship and moving her to another location. And the friend took exception to that. So it started a real bad friction between this man and Dale. And I think one thing that jumped out was when Dale went missing, this friend was caught ripping down missing posters of Dale. So that rubbed people the wrong way. That was just one of those things where, why is this guy not want this person found?
Yeah, that case is really bizarre. I do think that it wasn't only ripping down the posters, but someone had broken into it was either the body shop or the video store that his wife ran, and had ripped up photos of Dale and this man and their wives, like ripped them in half, almost like a vengeance type thing. And then there was a gun stolen from his body shop that was later deposited through the video return slot in his wife's video store. That's very ominous sounding.
Yeah, and I as I recall, there were bullets or shell casings or something that were scattered around in his body shop as well. So yeah, there's definitely some kind of tie between the body shop and that video store. Someone, taking something out of one place, depositing at another one. And I know Dale's daughter Tony came on and talked about the case, and she sort of filled us in what she could. And from what she said, it sounded like there was the person that called him for help that day sounded like it was maybe a female caller.
Yeah.
And the person that he had this feud going on with was a male. So it seems like if that person's involved, which a lot of people seem to think they might be involved, who's this female person that he had? Is it someone else? Or again, is it some kind of red herring that the call just was a coincidence, and maybe he did go out there and help that person, and they went on about their business, and on the way back from there, whatever happened to Dale happened. But that they've never been able to identify that caller, and I think that might go a long way to helping solve the case.
Well, if I remember correctly, the family definitely believes that he was lured to that call, because they put it together later that there actually wasn't cell phone service at the place that they said he was supposed to go and meet somebody. So they believed that that call was an attempt to get him out on the road away from the shop by himself. And, sure enough, they eventually found his truck. Some kids who were fishing, I think their fishing line caught on the truck. They brought it up, and the windows on the truck were halfway rolled down, which his wife told investigators Dale absolutely flat out never would drive it like that. The windows were either up or down with him, but not in between, which is a little thing, but sometimes those things, it means somebody else was in that truck.
Yeah, not just that, but a lot of his tools were found scattered along the highway too, just as if somebody had randomly thrown them out the window.
Yeah.
So just another strange clue that, again, don't really know what it means, but it might be something that could help solve the case if you could figure out who played a role in that.
Yeah. Again, I mean, Dale Williams is one of those cases where I feel as though there are likely some kind of secrets that he had that we don't know that would provide some answers. If it was indeed a woman caller, was he in some kind of entanglement and somebody was angry with him? I mean, this is all total speculation. We don't know. But it's really strange that his truck was found submerged in water. Somebody getting rid of the truck there, why wouldn't they get rid of him there as well? Just in the truck. It's a great way to dispose of him, but they weren't together.
Yeah. And it's one of those things, if that truck wasn't found in there, if the water wasn't low enough, they didn't snag their line on there. After all these years, we might not even know where his truck is.
Yeah. And from what I understand about the area, it's sort of vast. I mean, it's not like there's one logical body of water to look in, like we have in some cases, where, like where Randy Leach, like that specific stretch of river is probably where he would have gone in. This is sort of the wilderness out there. And very strange case.
Yeah, it's one of those ones that you just wish there were more clues to work with, but unfortunately there's not.
Yeah. Okay, so my last case seems to be a fairly clear-cut abduction case. The question, of course, is who is the abductor? Kelly Berg Dove, we covered it in episode 35. Kelly was a very young wife and mother. I think she was only 20 or so. In June 1982, she was working the graveyard shift at Imperial Gas Station on Route 11. This is in Harrisonburg, Virginia, near JMU, James Madison University. Her sister was the manager of the gas station, and Kelly routinely worked the overnight shift. She didn't mind doing it. It was something she didn't think twice about. Her husband dropped her off there at 10 p.m. for her shift. She talked to her mom around 11 and said, I got to go. The store's kind of busy. This was like a convenience store in the gas station that people stopped at for smokes and, chewing tobacco and a burrito and drinks, whatever the store had and gas, obviously. So Kelly called 911 at 2:27 a.m. on June 18th saying there was an obscene phone call and there was a strange man in the store who was, I believe the word she said was partially undressed. She called 911 again 2 minutes later. The 911 operator was a woman, and she dispatched her own husband, who was on duty, to the store. But in the few minutes between those two calls and a third call, the line went dead during a third call from Kelly. And by the time the officer got to the gas station, she was gone. Her cigarette was still burning in the ashtray. Her purse was still sitting there. The register had money in it, untouched, and Kelly was never seen or heard from again.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail right on the head. I think it was no doubt an abduction. No indication that she went on her own. And I wonder if it was not necessarily Kelly that was targeted. If it was just whoever happened to be there would have been, the target. If they were just looking for a victim, because as I recall, another female worker in another location not far from there had some obscene phone calls as well of someone doing the same thing that night. So maybe someone was sort of trolling local businesses looking for a victim to attack, and just decided to make his move there because the location was maybe a little bit more isolated or whatever.
Yeah. And what was really creepy about this case was Kelly and her sister said they routinely got obscene calls while they were working at the station, and they really weren't fazed by them. But in this case, the guy Kelly believed was calling from the payphone outside the store. So he was enjoying probably watching her, because I remember seeing photos of the store and it had a glass front, right? He was watching her while he was calling her and saying rude utterances to her, watching her get more and more uncomfortable. And then the line went dead during the third call, and Kelly vanished.
Yeah, that's what it's a shame because a lot of these type places, a lot of cops will hang out at night when it's slow and there's not much going on. They'll hang out in these kind of places and, you know, talk to people and have a cup of coffee, whatever. But unfortunately, there was no police around that area when this happened that night, or else they might have seen something or interrupted something, or maybe it wouldn't have happened at all in the first place.
Well, yeah, I mean, and it was again back then, it was sort of a real small town, and it was 1982. Now, almost all gas stations have surveillance footage, right? I mean, she said the guy was actually in the store. He would be captured on camera, either outside mounts or inside the store now. But back then, that did not exist.
Yeah, and it's no guarantee that it would have, caught him, but it would have been clues to work with at the very least, and maybe it would have, seeing a camera, knowing there was a camera there, maybe it would have caused him to not commit the crime in the first place. But I think it's pretty clear in this case, like we both mentioned, this is clearly a case of an abduction, and I think her family, they don't think she's alive. They think that she, was killed by someone. But they just want to see that person identified and held accountable.
Yeah, they did. The family had a theory that it was a schoolmate of Kelly's, who I guess had a reputation for some creepy behavior. But then you always wonder whether, Kelly said he was in the store in a state of undress. I mean, would she have recognized the guy? Did she know who he was? You would think she would have said that on the 911 call, Jim's in here and he's misbehaving. That's not what happened. She described a light colored vehicle that she saw outside. It's my opinion that she did not know the man, or at least did not recognize him.
Yeah. It's very, very frustrating when you do have some kind of descriptions, but just not enough to go on to identify anyone.
So that's my last case, Mike. What's your last case?
Well, my last case is the case of Keith Mann, and this is another really odd one. On Mother's Day weekend, 1997, Gregory Keith Mann, who went by Keith, vanished without a trace after a night out with some friends in Wichita Falls, Texas. On Saturday night, May 10th, that weekend, Keith was last seen by his friends. They had gone mudding, driving around, doing a little bit of four-wheeling or whatever, and they dropped him off at his apartment. They watched him walk up the stairs to his apartment, and sort of from there, he disappeared. The next day, his fiancée arrived to the apartment, and Keith was nowhere to be found. She found some beer bottles they had been carrying up the stairs with him when he was last seen, and that sort of indicated that he made it into the apartment.
Right.
But from there, again, we have another incident of someone last known to be in their own place going missing. Now, the interesting thing is that Keith did mention to his friends that he was meeting up with someone later on. He didn't say who, they didn't ask. There's no real description of who he was meeting up with. But apparently that person who has never come forward, never been identified, if he did wind up meeting with them, might hold some answers in this case, because there's just literally nothing to go on besides Keith walking into that apartment and then never being seen again.
Yeah. A couple of things stood out to me in that one. So one, the meeting time that he told his friends was incredibly specific. It was 12:15 a.m. That was a time that's just, you don't just say, hey, let's meet around 12:15. 12:15 is pretty specific. Why that time? That's very curious, right? And the other thing was that he worked for a car dealership, and he had borrowed a red Mustang for the weekend, which, that was a perk of working for the car dealer. And it was found parked with a cassette tape that was his. So they know that he had been in it at some point. It was found parked in a parking lot that he was known to use when he was in high school. And it was sort of I think it was like adjacent to a church, and he wasn't really supposed to park there. And his parents saw the car there and decided to look in it. And there was something with the trunk of the car that the lining had been pulled away from the side. And that was very strange because again, it's a brand new car from the dealer, presumably. I mean, I'm assuming it was a new car. So that whoever parked that car there was either Keith or someone who knew where Keith was prone to park.
Yeah, or it's just a really big coincidence, which I don't buy.
Yeah.
But it's interesting because Keith was only about 5'6", and there's been some speculation that when the person from the dealership that showed up to take the car away took it away, um, that they didn't have to move the seat like they normally did after Keith would drive a vehicle.
So
So
someone
there's
taller drove it.
some
Okay.
indication that someone taller drove it.
Hmm.
Um, but again, no one's been identified. No one's come forward to say they know what his movements were after that night. And no one saw anyone park that car. Although his sister, who lived in the house across the street from where the car was ultimately parked, did hear someone in the parking lot that night, but she didn't get up and look out the window. So had she might have seen someone else walking away from the car, driving in another car. She might have
She
been
hear
able to get.
voices, or what did she hear? Do you remember?
She just, as far as she remembered, I think she just heard a car pull into the lot.
Okay.
Maybe sort of just what you might hear with the door shutting, something like that. But she didn't get up and look out into the parking lot, because if she had
Yeah.
looked out her window, she might have seen something that might have given some clues. But unfortunately, she didn't, and there's just really nothing to go on.
Yeah. And again, this is one of the cases I was referring to when I said I believe that there are some secrets. I think that, Keith, I mean, he told his friends he was going to meet somebody. We have no idea who that was, but he apparently, assuming he met that person, he never came back. So something happened. There was some speculation early on that he had sort of been, his fiance was moving. They had got this new apartment together, and she was imminently moving in that weekend, if I'm correct. And so there was some speculation that he was spooked by this somewhat, final step in their relationship, and he vanished. Chose to start a new life. But just from what I believe, we interviewed a detective who worked the case when we covered it. No one in his family really believes that was what happened. He didn't take anything with him, really, and again, disappearing to start a new life is one of those tropes you always hear about, but how often does it really actually happen?
Yeah, and he had uncashed paychecks. He had a little bit of money in the bank, so no indication that he started a new life, because nothing points to that, and he didn't take any money with him to help do that. So it's just another bizarre case with no clues to go on. And it's so bizarre that I'm going to be covering it a little bit more in depth on my podcast Criminology for the 25th anniversary that's coming up. And we're gonna be teaming up with Nick and the Captain from True Crime Garage to sort of maximize the attention we can get for this case for the 25th anniversary in May. So I'm excited to take a little bit more of a deep dive into it.
Great. That's an exciting announcement. That's going to be a great show.
Yeah.
I know Keith's family's, it's been a long time there, this case, there was never any, as much as I dug, there was never any whispers about, sometimes you hear whispers about like, oh, there was drugs or, there wasn't, that did not exist. And he seemed to be just a normal straight shooter guy. He was, played baseball in college and worked for, selling cars, and he vanished. It's really, really perplexing. Hopefully you guys can make some headway when you cover that case with those guys.
Yeah, we're gonna dig in, and we do have the same investigator that we spoke with on missing persons, who's got some updated information, and the reward's been increased. So hopefully we can share some new information and sort of bring it to a newer audience, and hopefully there's some developments for his family, because it's another family that's been going through hell for the last 25 years.
Are they actively investigating this case now, or is this a PI hired by the family?
No, this is the original detective, not the original, but the same detective that was on the case when
good. Okay.
Detective Laughlin, and he's gung ho on solving the case and not resting until he makes some headway. So I hope for Keith's family that he's able to come through with some kind of clues to work with.
Well, and what was so it's the 25th anniversary this year. So, oh my God, I'm so bad at math. What was the year that he vanished?
May 1997.
Okay, so I can't remember when we covered this. Did he have a cell phone?
I don't think, I don't remember that off the top of my head. So
I don't either. I don't remember hearing anything about a cell phone.
Yeah,
he must not have had one.
It may not have been one. I think that I'm trying to think back. That's how you know you're getting old when you can't remember what you were doing in 1997. But yeah, I got married that year, and I'm trying to think when I got my first cell phone, and maybe it was around
I
1997.
had one before that. I know because I got married in 98 and I had a cell phone for a couple years before that for sure.
Okay.
But he who knows if it had really gotten to tech. I don't know. That's a strange. I don't remember hearing anything about a cell phone in any of the coverage. So my inclination is that he did not have one. And even if he did, it probably wasn't equipped with the cell phone, the GPS kind of stuff that cell phones have now.
Yeah, definitely not any kind of social media apparatuses or
Right.
GPS, that kind of stuff that would help you helpful now. But
No.
hopefully it's a case that has, despite the passage of time, hopefully there's some kind of developments.
So are you doing a cross show with criminology, or is that how's that working?
Yep. So Criminology and True Crime Garage will both be releasing an episode about the case the same week.
Oh, great.
The first week of May, True Crime Garage releases their episodes a little earlier in the week, and they're going to do it in their style that, Nick and the Captain do their conversations. And then we're going to include some interview audio when we release it the following Saturday, following True Crime Garage. So between the two podcasts, we hope to really bring a lot of attention to the case, and hopefully people spread the word about it.
Yeah, because I have to tell you, I mean, in the missing persons cases, obviously, you and I are both been very invested in them. Keith Mann's case is absolutely never one that is brought up on any one of these, websites or forums or threads that say, you hear it's Brian Schaefer and Maura Murray and all those, but Keith Mann is not named among those people, but his case is just as perplexing.
Yeah, and especially when you know that it's a 2-mile radius, 2 miles from his apartment to his parents' house, and the secret lies, in my estimation, in that 2-mile radius, and just very very perplexing, nothing to work with, and leaving detectives scrambling 25 years later.
Yeah, very strange.
That wraps up our 50th episode. A little different than we normally do the episodes, but I actually like this. It was very conversational, and we got to sort of pick each other's brains a little bit and share some theories on these cases.
Yeah, it's fun to feel comfortable sort of talking about our own opinions, which I normally reserve doing that because I'm sort of committed to relaying the facts in these cases. But it's fun to talk about them and pick, like you said, pick each other's brains and try to figure out what no one has been able to figure out before us. And, again, we mostly failed, but it's still an interesting exercise to try. We do have a shout out that we need to make.
Yeah. And that goes out to Alexis Clark, who's our newest patron on Patreon. So thank you so much for that support. Everyone that's kicking in, we really appreciate that. And as usual, we do contribute some of that money to the Charlie Project, which is a great resource for us and for all these missing persons cases. So thank you for that. And again, this is 50 down. We're looking forward to the next 50 episodes, and I'm sure there's going to be plenty of different perplexing cases coming our way that are just going to be as mysterious as these first 50.
Yes, and in fact, the next episode 51, is going to be a very famous case that has always fascinated me, and I'm really excited to dig into that one.
Yeah, should we say what it is, or should we keep people in suspense?
You go ahead, say what it is.
It's a little case called Jody Huisentruit, which I think a lot of people that are listening are going to know that case, and we've got some great guests, people in her family. Investigator that's done a lot of reporting on the case. So I think we're going to hopefully bring some new information to people and get some updated information as well, because the anniversary for her case is also approaching. So
right, 27 years.
Yeah, so hopefully we can get that word out there, and people will keep talking about that case. Another fascinating case that just seems to boggle people's minds.
Yes. All right, Mike. Well, thank you.
This was fun, and let's plan on doing this again at episode 100.
Okay. See you in a couple of years. We hope you enjoyed this episode of Missing Persons. If you can provide any information to help solve the case we discussed in this episode, please contact the appropriate authorities.
If you enjoy this podcast, please take a moment to tell your friends about missing persons and invite them to listen to the show. Word of mouth will help us grow and bring these cases to a larger audience. You can also help us by taking a moment to rate and review Missing Persons on the platform you're listening to us now on. Just a reminder that new episodes of Missing Persons air every other Saturday. If you want to find us on social media, you can search Facebook for Missing Persons Podcast. And we're also on Twitter with the handle @missing_pod. On behalf of Jess Betancourt, this is Mike Morford saying thanks, and we'll see you next time on Missing Persons.